Hi, I'm Ashot. I called this episode 100% Idiot. Long ago, in one of the many companies where I successfully worked, I became close to an ambitious colleague. We saw each other daily in the routine office and also regularly met with our families after work. We shared common moral values, we looked at the world similarly, and even loved or hated the same things equally. Thomas was purposeful and successful. I always knew he would achieve a lot and sincerely wished this for him. At some point, our paths diverged. No, we didn't break up. He left to work in Africa and I changed employer. However, we were still regularly communicating via video calls. And sometimes I flew to Africa or he came to me in Europe. Once, about 5 years ago, he was very emotionally explaining from early morning how insane his then toxic boss had become this time. Yes, I had heard about his boss before. He was quite a tough nut. The man could understand absolutely nothing about a specific matter, but easily give out smart advice on it to everyone. Or he could listen to Thomas very long and attentively and then speak out a phrase that had absolutely nothing to do with the context being discussed. But that morning, Thomas was particularly emotional. This time, his boss had outdone himself and started openly engaging in micromanagement. He began controlling all of Thomas's phone calls, all his trips to clients, to partners, to distributors. Thomas was an experienced seller and definitely did need that kind of control. His feelings and dignity were hurt. He was calling his boss a 100% idiot. And all my attempts to see even a drop of positivity in his boss along with Thomas were unsuccessful. Well, it really happens like that sometimes. A 100% idiot, not carrying a drop of positivity. Well, right? Let's give it a shot. Finding myself time after time in various life situations, I discovered an interesting pattern over time concerning the people around me. As much as I wouldn't want a label, in fact, none of the people around me is exactly 100% this or that. For example, an idiot. And none of them is ever exactly zero. For example, a super friend. The one who seems to you, for example, 100%, let's say bad, is actually bad for you only for 80% max. That means he is at least for 20% good for you. Moreover, this mere 20% of his goodness bring you a whole 80% of benefit, even if you don't see it right away, as it was with Thomas and his idiot boss. By the way, Thomas's patience stopped that day. He quit the next day because of the boss, engaged in a completely new business for himself, succeeded in it very quickly, and probably never realized that he owed all this to the idiot boss. If it wasn't him, Thomas would probably still be sitting at that old job today. By the way, I wasn't the first who discovered this pattern. The great economist and sociologist Vilfredo Pareto voiced this rule. Now it's called the Pareto law or 80-20 principle. For many years, I've been so inspired by the 80-20 principle that I started collecting examples of Pareto's law from life. And in one of my philosophical reflections, I even invented my personal gesture associated with it and voiced it to the world in my first published book, The Brunette Mirage. Welcome to Amazon. Here are some interesting life examples of 80-20 principle. Automotive brands. 80% of cars on the road belong to 20% of car brands. And the remaining 20% of cars on the road are produced by the remaining 80% of car brands. Company clients. 80% of company's revenue comes from 20% of its clients. The remaining 80% of its clients are so unimportant that they bring the company only the remaining 20% of revenue. Company salespeople. 80% of a company's sales are made by 20% of its salespeople. The remaining 80% of the company's salespeople are so unimportant that they only bring together the remaining 20% of sales. Decision of client to buy. 80% of a client's decision to buy your product specifically is based on 20% of your product's features. The remaining 80% of your product's features are so unimportant that they carry only the remaining 20% of the client's decision to buy them. Incoming emails. Inbox. Processing 20% of incoming emails will advance you 80% towards your goal. The remaining 80% of emails are so unimportant that they will advance you only the remaining 20% towards your goal. Success, productivity, and time. 80% of success on the way to the goal comes in the last 20% of time. And in the first 80% of time, only 20% of success is achieved. Remember the rule of 6P. Proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. Next one, goals and prioritization. 20% of your goals are responsible for 80% of your success. The remaining 80% of your goals are responsible for only 20% of your success. Work and life balance. Those 80% of your lifetime that you spend at work bring you only 20% of happiness. So the remaining 20% of your lifetime that you spend with family and friends should bring you 80% of happiness. Fake versus real. 80% of people are truly themselves only 20% of their time. 80% of their time, such people fake and pretend to be someone else they're not. Only 20% of people have the courage to be genuinely themselves 80% of their time. Working time. Spend 80% of your time on only those 20% of your tasks that contain 80% of the final result. And spend the remaining 20% of your time on those 80% of your tasks that contain only 20% of the final result. Extra mile. Always choose the most difficult path with 80% difficulty. Only 20% of people take it. You will have almost no competition and you will succeed. 80% of people choose the easiest path with 20% difficulty. They have their huge competition and few of them succeed. Alternative specialists, medicine. 80% of specialists who call themselves alternative are pure charlatans. It doesn't matter whether consciously or not. They hang this label of alternativeness on their forehead or office sign precisely so that you cannot effectively measure the result of their work. Only 20% of specialists who call themselves alternative are really outstanding masters of their craft. Moreover, they are present in parallel in the classical world of the same service. They don't feel the need to position themselves only as alternative because the result of their work can be effectively measured. And here's a description of my personal gesture. I call it hands folded into a heart. Each hand symbolizes one 80-20 perspective on a certain aspect of life. 4 fingers represent 80 and 1 finger represents 20. Folded together, the 2 perspectives are actually opposite to each other. But now they symbolize yet another level of the 80-20 consciousness, namely between the 2 perspectives themselves. So the 80% in one hand is actually the 20% in other hand. And the 20% in one hand is actually the 80% in other hand. That means nothing in this life is only bad or only good. In every bad, there is a good, and in every good, there is a bad. So we can always learn and always be happy. The gesture could be used as a greeting, as a sign of gratitude, as a signature, or just as anything else that demonstrates we are not fake but real. We are not humiliating but building up. We are not negative but positive. Perhaps my gesture, having left my book, will fly around the world and one day return to me.